Welcome, everyone. It's a rainy afternoon in San Diego, the one rainy afternoon of the year, we hope. It's my special pleasure. We had a number of introductions, and it's my special pleasure to make, I think, the most important introduction, and that is our guest and person I'd like to talk with for the next hour, my friend Anthony Davis. Let me tell you a little about Anthony first. Born 1951 in Paterson, New Jersey. It's a part of a territory my family comes from as well.
Sorry, I lived in Harlem, too.
I know. Anthony is one of a generation of artists who really defy description. Some of his albums list him as a jazz pianist. Some of his compositions, he's obviously a composer. We're here to talk about Central Park Five, his most recent opera, but he's also the composer of numerous other operas. 1986 was the premiere of X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X. Under the Double Moon opera followed in 1989. Tanya, the telling of the kidnapping of Patty Hearst, occurred and premiered in 1992. Amistad, the tale of a slave insurrection aboard ship, premiered in 2009. A colleague of ours, Alan Havis, wrote the libretto. Lear on the Second Floor, 2012, a reconstruction, a very interesting reconstruction of the King Lear story. And the subject of today, the composition from 2019, Central Park Five. Anthony, welcome.
Well, thank you.
I think my first question to sort of get this sorted out is, why did you pick the medium of opera to concentrate on? I know you've written instrumental music as well, but obviously the less
opera is something I was thinking about. I think I first had the bug and the idea of composing an opera, and actually before I ever heard an opera. And that was, I was in 10th grade. I was in 10th grade. I was living in Italy for 10th grade, and I had this wonderful philosophy teacher who decided to do a course on existentialism. So I was reading Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, and it's through Nietzsche and Kierkegaard that I became interested in opera. The more the idea of it, the idea of what Nietzsche described in The Birth of Tragedy, so the Dionysian and the Apollonian and the collision of those two concepts of art. And I thought it mapped really well to this idea of the African-American experience because of the nature of the think of the Dionysian as the improvised, as being the whole tradition from the African diaspora, and then the Apollonian is mapping onto the kind of European tradition of formal traditions. So I mean, in a way, I thought he was more apt to describe what an African-American opera would be rather than what a German opera like Wagner's would be.
So you describe this work as an African-American opera?
Well, I think it comes from that experience, and it comes from the, I think my intention when I was naive intention when I was 15 years old was that I was going to reinvent opera and make it into this new form that would have both improvisation and also the formal concept of opera in it as well, but that it would have this dynamic energy coming from that experience, and I wanted to tell stories that related to the African-American experience. So initially, I think the first idea I had for an opera was to do The Invisible Man as an opera.
That would lend itself to the music.
Yeah, for Ralph Ellison's novel, but I wasn't really ready to do it at that point. So I was still, so I was getting together my bands, and I started doing suites, but always in the back of my mind, I thought I would try to do an opera.
That's an interesting point, because even with your instrumental music, the idea of writing in suites or providing narrative.
Yes.
I mean, there's always this underlying story behind your music. So maybe in a natural way, going to opera was a natural outcome.
Well, it was, and when I was at Yale, I went to Yale for my undergrad, and I took a course that was supposed to be 19th century music with Robert Bailey. And Robert Bailey was a renowned Wagner scholar. Yeah. So the whole course was Wagner,
that part of the 19th.
Forget about piano music, I did play, I was playing Beethoven and all that stuff, Brahms, forget that. So he would do like Carl Marie Weber, then Wagner, and then Strauss, and that was 19th century. I said, wow, okay. So I was kind of force-fed Wagner to a lot of degree, and so I began writing suites with leitmotifs and all this stuff.
I think I saw an interview with you where you said that opera is not a realistic, let's see if I got the quote correctly, opera is not a realistic form.
Right.
Time is suspended. Well, how does that figure in the story of the Central Park Five?
Well, I think because you can delve into the emotional world, and also what lies behind it, all the things that lie behind it. So you're not, in a way, it's certainly with opera, we're so flexible with how we deal with time. Time can stop, or time can move forward very rapidly. So I felt that it was a way of, because also just the conceit that people have to sing everything. They're singing everything. It takes it out of the realism, the realistic realm, into something else. And so I was very interested in, and then also the idea of how music references things from the recent past. I was thinking about in constructing Harlem, the Harlem of the Central Park Five, what that would be in terms of music, and what Harlem means to me musically too.
What it means to
and
the world.
then also the dynamism of having these five young men sing together in a way that you might recall, some of the doo-wop groups, or some of the how vocal groups developed in
Well, before we talk more specifically about Central Park Five, I don't mean to cut you off, but I was thoroughly enjoying what you have to say. Maybe we should take a look at
Okay.
a clip that sort of captures it for those who may not have seen the opera.
Stop acting like you have something to fear.
So then, does that work? Is that what you said here? Yes.
Okay, so we get a little bit of time to get it cued.
Yeah.
When you're never alone.
I think the Central Park Five, the opera, is a crucial story in our culture right now.
First of all, this story is still relevant, which is very unfortunate, but I think we need to realize that and accept it and acknowledge it and do something about it.
You can't hear enough of this story and stories like this, because you have to remember that this is one of many stories that actually caught national attention.
I also think that it's important to bring it in this format, in this genre, because there are people that wouldn't hear it if they didn't come to this opera, and it's also exposing opera to a new audience of people that already know the story but are coming to see an opera.
Opera is kind of like history in motion, and especially this opera is about truth. It's the retelling of what happened in 1989.
The Central Park Five deals with these relations with race, it deals with relations of innocence. This piece has to deal with the passion and the heart of these people.
Then you add Anthony Davis and his style and his voice to that, and you just have gold.
In the case of the Central Park Five, it's something that I remember very distinctly. I'm living in New York at the time. I lived in New York in the 80s. When it came up to today to do an opera, I was fascinated with that, because a lot of times I've gone to subject matter that's sort of where there's a collision of culture.
Anthony Davis does a wonderful job of juxtaposing the position of not knowing where you are by changing the meter.
The music is really representative of 1989.
Anthony Davis has been a master at highlighting the dissonance.
So if you're not hearing it in the vocal line, you're definitely hearing it in the music and vice versa.
But there are also sections that are hummable. There are also sections that kind of sound like music that was happening at the time. I think one of the unique features of my music is its rhythmic conception, and that rhythm propels the drama.
We're out here, but we don't care. We are the young ones who keep coming.
The Central Park Five story is five youth in Harlem.
These five young boys who were all between 14 and 16 and
that were accused of doing a heinous crime, a rape and beating in Central Park in 1989.
And there was an outcry for justice.
they choose these five young boys since they already had them in police custody.
Implicated them, indicted them, charged them. They go to prison for it.
the point is that they were charged with a crime that they did not commit.
These real people who spent time in prison for a crime they didn't commit. It tears you up inside. And but we know we have a job to do, and that job is to get the word out. That's something that is not political. It is something that really speaks to the heart of men and women everywhere.
I think it's important that we revisit these moments, to think and look deeply into it. And through music, I think I can try to get people to empathize with the five, to imagine that they are one of the five, that this happened to them.
My mind, my happiness, all stolen, taken away, all gone.
I think audience members will have an opportunity to really be honest with themselves about the differences of experience in America.
But I hope that they will come out of it with a better picture of where we've come from, but how far we have to go to right these wrongs.
Having the opportunity of telling this story is it's an honor and a privilege to do, but it's also a duty as well.
We are the priests who own the night.
This piece was premiered this year, June 2019.
Yes.
And how long was it in gestation? I mean, from conception
I
to...
think I started working on it in around 2015, 2014, and I did an initial performance 2016. That was a kind of first version, and it was a kind of almost like a workshop performance in Newark, New Jersey. That was in 2016, actually, ironically, 3 days after the election.
A lot of inspiration.
Yeah, so it was very funny because when, of course, I have the character Donald Trump is a character in the opera, and so when Trump first appeared on the stage, this was on Friday after the Tuesday election, the whole audience booed. Which was great. It was like being like this Renaissance character, you know what else?
Right.
You know, like and they booed him when he took his bow at first, and then he was great. But it was a great performance.
You got their attention.
Yeah.
Now, you said something a minute ago I wanted to follow up on. Opera is probably the most complicated artistic form. I mean, you've got theater with all of its complications, sets, design, makeup, dance. You've got music and orchestra. You have the underlying narrative. And you said a moment ago that you've used improvisation in this piece. Now, that's part of your DNA. How did you work improvisation in the score? And
that's been from the beginning when the concept of opera, part of it was I wanted the idea of the immediacy, that every performance is different. Every performance is unique. And also working with people who are comfortable within the wide range of that musical tradition. So when I did X, I had a 10-piece ensemble of musicians who knew my music, and so I've worked over the years with wonderful improvisers like George Lewis and Mark Dresser, who's out here in the audience, Sharona Salaam, a drummer. I mean, so J.D. Perrin. So a lot of these people have, over the years, I've worked on, I guess now it's over 20 years, almost 30 years of working with people in developing my opera projects with particular musicians in mind.
So you just can't hand this score to an orchestra pit?
And I have these, and it features different, and I try to tailor it to what they do. I mean, kind of what Ellington does, to think about what their voice is and what they bring in terms of what their musical interests are. And that's been always really exciting. In Central Park 5, I had Michael Desson, who was playing trombone. He's a fantastic trombonist. And he was a student here at UCSD years ago, but he's a wonderful musician. And as well as Kyle Modell, who's a student of Mark Dresser's, who played bass, and the great Earl Howard, who did the electronics in the score, playing Kurzweil. And that's something we work together on in terms of developing processes and also, what the kind of sound world that will be part of the opera.
Maybe, we have a piano, we have your score, we have you. Maybe you can give us some sense of how that works. I mean, you were playing on some pieces of the score earlier. How did you go about wedding that in to allow players to take some freedoms and yet keep the whole piece on track?
Well, sometimes it's more traditional in terms of the using certain kind of harmonic world, et cetera. This particular piece I'm going to play, look at, it was part of, it originally comes from a piano clarinet concerto I wrote called You Have the Right to Remain Silent, which is kind of appropriate for this. And when I wrote that piece, I wrote it as a feature for wonderful clarinetist and contra alto clarinetist J.D. Parent, so it was written especially for him. And this featured the contra as the lead instrument. And in the opera, I used baritone saxophone because it's harder to find contralto clarinets around usually. So this is, and what it was kind of in the middle of the concerto, and I was consciously trying to evoke a little bit of Charles Mingus's musical world, and thinking about Mingus and his approach to harmony, and how he also looking at thinking about what Harlem means, this kind of portrait of Harlem. And that also brought me to thinking about, of course, Duke Ellington, and particularly the Harlem Suite of Ellington, which is one of his masterpieces from the late 1940s. This is, so it starts, has a chord here, and then what it's usually opens up into a duet with the bass and the Kurzweil using electronic stuff. So I'll play something around that. Moves on into the Aria. Right? It's using a progression that Mingus uses F minor to D flat. I think they're like
Walk by a hat.
Yeah, it's like 20 compositions like that. So it was kind of homage to that.
It's a signature.
Yeah.
Well, it's the signature of Mingus and also Ellington, too.
Ellington Strayhorn.
And how do you tell a Harlem story of any kind without Ellington?
Yeah, oh, you definitely. I mean, Ellington. I mean, if you go on 106th Street, it's Duke Ellington Street for a reason.
Yeah, that's for a reason.
A statue of Duke, and also the later in that section when the voice comes in, you hear it comes in a descending major third, and I start using that as a kind of motif that comes throughout the opera.
So are there motifs for the...
Oh yeah,
I
definitely.
mean, it's a very powerful thing to have 5 black males singing in a quintet pretty much consistently throughout. Yeah. So are they a character?
I wouldn't say they're a character. They're differentiated, but they're also, I wanted them to take the opportunity to have them sing together, because in a way so that they come together and then they have their separate lines and separate things happen at the same time. So it's not as if they're undifferentiated, because part of the thing I was worried about is that we would create the same sin that ended up why they ended up in prison, because
they
were invisible. They all look alike, No. But their voices are very, very different, and I thought of also. So I did some of that, but also I wanted to take occasion to have them also sing together, because what really joins them together is their pain, is their suffering and their sense of and what they had to endure.
And their injustice.
Yes.
We have some slides of some of the characters. Maybe you can sort of walk us through what you...
Yeah, this is when they were in Harlem. They're actually before they go into Central Park, right here, the first slide. I think go to the next one. This is The Mask. And The Mask is interesting. And when Richard Wesley, who was the librettist of the opera, wrote the opera, originally actually didn't have Trump as a character, and he didn't have the district attorney as a character. All those were personified by the mask. This idea of the mask having all these identities. I felt that it needed different voices for those parts, so we began to differentiate those a little bit. But the mask is this, in a way, kind of the voice of oppression, the voice of the repression of it could be from the media, it could be from the police, could be from the criminal justice system, and you see the director they made this jacket with different. These are kind of the more tame things that are on there, but wilding, savages, horror, Harlem, a lot of the stuff that you saw in the newspaper clippings, et cetera.
Front pages.
So this kind of how the press kind of scandalized them and convicted them in the press. And that was part of the whole energy of it.
Let's see some more.
Yeah. Okay, this is when they started to get ready to go into the street, go into we are the freaks. They're singing the song "We Are the Freaks."
So you poached a little R&B.
Oh yeah. This section of the opera was really funny, because I kept on when I was thinking about how am I going to get them into Central Park, and what was interesting about it is that part of this whole situation in New York in 1989 was the fact that it was in 1989 was important because it's really when hip hop went mainstream, when hip hop moved from Bronx to Manhattan, and all these kids were the 5 were all caught up in kind of hip hop culture. So to white people in New York, this was a threatening thing, and so even the terminology used, like wilding, when they say wilding in the park, it comes from the song Wilding, Wild Thing by Tone Loc. The song, and that's what they were singing. They were singing Wild Thing, which is a hip hop anthem, and so in the media it became they were wilding in the park. So and also 1889 was the year that Do the Right Thing came out, Spike Lee's movie.
Right.
And there's a great scene in Do the Right Thing where Radio Raheem enters the pizza parlor with his boom box. Right. And he's playing playing Public Enemy on his
confrontation.
Boom box. Yeah, and it's a confrontation, and Danny Aiello picks up a baseball bat and smashes the boom box. So my theory is that in terms of the larger expression of it, that these five, that when they put these five in prison, they were putting Radio Raheem in prison. That's what that's basically doing. And actually, you see in some of the protest signs that they showed in a video earlier that the white protesters who were calling for the death penalty for the Central Park Five, they had posters saying "Do the right thing." Reversal. Taking what Spike had done, do the right thing, and now do the right thing was to execute the five.
Well, the same is happening with the content of the character.
Yeah.
Let's
so
see some more.
So yeah,
Who do we have here?
that's when the beginning of the interrogation. You can see that's Orson playing Raymond Santana, and that's the district attorney in the case. The assistant district attorney was a woman. There were two women involved in the prosecution of the five, and that was a very interesting dynamic to me. And one of the reasons I wanted to have the district attorney as a separate character, because I wanted to have a female voice in the opera. But also the fact that for her, it was, the rape and assault of Tricia Miele was the ultimate in this idea of the exploitation, the abuse of women. So it's pitting in a way a feminist perspective against Black Lives Matter perspective. So that was very interesting to me, dynamic in the opera. So she feels very righteous in condemning them, and therefore jumps to certain conclusions when she was prosecuting them, and so I thought that was something I wanted to have in the opera. It's a sense of what this righteous indignation was, but at the same time is misplaced. So that's kind of what. And she's still Linda Fairstein, who was the woman who prosecuted the case, also wrote crime novels. She became known as a crime novelist later, and she still believes that they were guilty.
More of the same
Yes, yeah, interrogation of this Yusuf Salaam, playing Yusuf Salaam character. So go ahead. Okay, that's the Donald Trump. We have to remember this is 1989, so it's not Trump today. It's more like Don Jr. Because he was more like Don Jr. So it's like Don Jr. Trump. My theory is that his political career began with the Central Park Five.
I think you're correct.
And he exploited, and his strategy of exploiting the racial divide really started here. And here he put full-page ads in all the newspapers in New York calling for the death penalty and support our police, bring back the death penalty.
Now you're describing him as the boogeyman of the story, but you also see that character as representative of a broader
of course
ethic.
Yeah, it's a broader. I mean, and that's the scary part. And part of the thing why I wanted, for example, kind of a chorus behind him, because this idea of and also sort of what's interesting. I love writing characters like this. Sometimes it's looking behind what is the allure, what attracts people to the flame. And obviously it has appeal.
Yeah.
I mean, and so that's when you really look carefully at that, then you get closer to how dangerous it really is. If you just make fun of it, if it's just humorous, just like Saturday Night Live sketch, and that kind of puts us at a safe distance, and we don't realize how pernicious and how threatening to people he really is. So in this case, when he has and I use the fact that he repeats himself all the time. It's really fun for me to write his music because someone asked me to describe how do you write for Donald Trump. One of my classmates from Yale said, "Well, how do you write for Donald Trump?" And I said, "Well, it's easy. He's a tenor. He has to be a tenor because you hear his voice. Secondly, he repeats himself a lot, and he never completes a sentence.
Never completes a sentence.
That's it. and so I didn't actually. The librettist didn't actually not complete a sentence.
So making sure a few.
But I think the idea of the repetition and also how that resonates with his followers.
Do you think having an actual character, Donald Trump, on stage, despite the fact he is a historical figure, takes away from the scariness? I mean, that it's possible for an audience to attribute all of their hate and anxiety to this character and not to the circumstance.
I was worried about a little bit about that. I mean, and somewhat with the director, because the director went for the humor a little bit. But you need a little humor because it was, in a way, the story was so dark that, for example, one of the scenes Trump has when he's talking on his cell phone, then imagine a 1989 cell phone, which is pretty this big thing, on a golden toilet. So, I mean, that's a kind of funny arrogance, and you sort of see, his Trump Tower apartment kind of thing. But some of that humor, I think, was necessary in order to bring some levity to the opera, but it detracted a little bit by how dangerous he really is. And the way I played it actually was not so much for laughs, but for the fact that what he was saying, and how he looked at the black community, and also the fact the larger dynamic of the battle for gentrification in New York. That the Central Park is in a way the middle of the boundary between the Upper West Side and Harlem.
Yeah, that was the meta message. We have some more.
This is the masked character now as a policeman, now as part of the interrogation. You see the district attorney and the mask interrogating, in this case, Antron and Raymond.
And the script spells mask M-A-S-Q-U-E.
Right.
Not M-A-S-K.
Right, exactly. And I think because Richard, when he wrote it, was thinking about almost the Renaissance figure of the mask, that would figure in Renaissance opera and Renaissance theater. And I think I expanded it to be much more emblematic of kind of the racial animus.
When I first saw it, I read into that character, the trickster, Legba.
Oh, Legba, yeah. Well, I love the trickster. I mean, he's in every opera I write, but I think, well, yes, but I think that there's a kind of malice and malevolent aspect that the trickster can, he doesn't necessarily show you the right way, but he's amoral, not immoral. Mm-hmm. And so I think in this case, this character is much more, it's much more pernicious and much more thinking about the racial subjugation, so I think the character is, and much more real in that sense. He takes on different guises. He is a reporter in the beginning, right. And then he becomes, a policeman, and he becomes the judge toward the end of the opera. He's the judge, and then he's a policeman again. So I think that, it's all these figures of authority, whether it's authority in terms of the press or authority in terms of domination and oppression within the black community.
And there's a scene of the mask that is with painted face. So were you literally getting at the idea of a mask, or was that just a two-facedness, one half white, one half black?
Oh, that was the earlier version, yeah.
Oh, that's the
early version, and that was with, yeah, actually that was a weird story because I didn't want him to, the actor did it on his own.
Beware of creativity.
No, the director, the librettist, and I all said, please do not paint your face half black, half white. If anything, you should be red, right? None of that, but.
Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah, no. But he just did it on his own, So he showed up on stage with painted up like that, and I said, oh my God, So that was kind of.
Okay, I misplaced
that. But I know that was pretty funny, yeah.
Well, let's talk about the actual music. We have a scene, Corey's Aria. Maybe you could set that up for us. Where is it in the story?
Well, this is in Act 3 of the opera, toward the end of the opera. And the aria happens just after Corey's been released from prison, he was in prison for 13 years. The other 4 were in juvenile detention for 7 years. And then Corey was trialed as an adult. He was slightly older than the others. even though in a lot of respects he's more immature than the others, in terms of his maturity, but he ended up going to an adult prison. So he's an adult. He was at Rikers at first, and then went to an upstate prison. And so after 13 years, he was released from prison. And some of the scenes that happened, he actually met the person who actually committed the crime was Matias Reyes. And Matias Reyes was a serial killer who had already killed other women in their apartments in Harlem prior to his assault. And they had him in custody, when they arrested the 5, but they never tested him to see if he matched or anything. They never considered him a suspect. And so he ended up in Rikers with Corey Wise.
So they met in prison.
And they had a fight. They actually had a fight in Rikers Island.
That's not in the opera.
Huh?
That fight
No,
is-
it's not in the opera, no. But because it wasn't relevant to it. But later on, many years later, Matias Reyes became a born-again Christian, and he decided to confess. So he confessed to the assault. And so we kind of invented a scene where this happens, where he's trying to tell Corey that he shouldn't have been in prison.
So that's the underpinning of Corey's opera.
And
Aria.
then he goes to the masked character and tells him his story of how he committed the assault, and then Corey's released.
Maybe we should see and hear that.
They stole from me all of them, the police, the DA, and them. Who's gonna pay me back? They stole my mind, my happiness, all stolen, taken away, all gone. Who's gonna pay me back? Who's gonna put back the chunks of me that were ripped out? All I ever wanted was for truth to come shining through. I need everyone to know. But now that the truth has come, why does it hurt more than the lie that brought me so low?
That's Nathan Granner as Corey Wise.
That must be very difficult to rehearse.
Yeah,
For an actor, singer to
yeah,
put
yeah.
themselves into that character.
Yeah, he's an amazing performer. He did, and also with the orchestra, it's quite a bit different with the whole ensemble.
Maybe you should tell us the names of the singers, the 5 young men, the actors.
It was Nathan Granner, was Corey Wise. Let's see, I'm trying to remember all the names.
I've got them right here.
Okay, good, beautiful. Cedric Berry is wonderful baritone as Yusef Salaam. Bernard Holcomb is Kevin Richardson. Daryl Akon is Antron McCrae, and Orson Van Gay is Raymond Santana. And they were wonderful, wonderful performers. I was very, 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 very happy with all of
I
them.
think I saw another clip of Bernard Holcomb made a comment that this work, for him, he thought, brought together 2 worlds that never spoke to one another. People who know opera didn't know the story. People who know the story didn't know opera. I mean, do you think you're sort of bridging some territories here?
Well, I like that. I mean, it's kind of transgressive, I think, and I think, but in a way, I mean, African-American singers know both worlds. They inhabit both worlds.
You do.
And we all inhabit, and as an African American in this society, we all inhabit those, you know, we always have those different worlds we inhabit. And I think bringing that together to me is so important, because it's bringing a different reality to the stage, and also the fact that how opera can speak to that. You know, that opera is not just a European form. Well, opera can be made in our image, made that we can make opera what we want it to be.
Oh, you've done that very cleverly, very cleverly. We went through some slides here. I wonder if we can back up and see a few of them, and you can tell us something about the characters and the scenes. Now,
Yeah.
what's happening here?
Well, that's the 5 with their parents, with different parents, and we had an ensemble of singers. They played parents and played different roles. Actually, the one on the far right also played Matias Reyes later in the opera. The woman who's on the second from the right plays Sharona Salaam, who's Yusef's mother, and she became very active in there with what I think the genesis of the Black Lives Matter movement, and she's been active ever since. You know.
Now, have you met the actual men of
Yes.
And have they seen your opera?
No, they have not seen my opera
You've talked
yet.
about it with them?
I did meet them. I met them in LA at the ACLU luncheon, and I actually brought together 3 sets of the 5, the original 5, the 5 from the Netflix series, and the 5 from my opera. We're all at the same event. So that was quite something. And meeting them, I had met Yusef Salaam's sister before, and I'm meeting Yusef, and I had a great conversation with him and the others as well. It was an amazing experience to do that. I hope they have the opportunity to see it in the future.
I'd be very interested to talk with them afterwards.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Do we have another slide? I think this speaks for
Okay,
itself.
this is the example of actual press that was in New York at the time. You know, the Central Park Horror, wilding, that we talked about before. Street slang for going berserk. It says, okay. As we know, it's from the song with the wild thing, wild thing. So originally they held seven teens. The portrait of rampage and rape without guilt. Okay, so they were actually convicting them 5 in the press way before even the trial happened. So this is Sharona Salaam, who's singing about what happened to her child, the loss of her child's innocence, Yusef, and she was prominent in a lot of New York One interviews with Sharona Salaam at the time. And she was one of the most vocal of the parents. She was a school teacher in New York at the time. And she, as I said, she became really involved in trying and getting their exoneration, when they were exonerated. And politically, and she paid the price. I mean, she lost her job, et cetera, because she was such a strong advocate for her son and for the other 4 of the 5. And that's her, actually, during the trial, Sharona Salaam actually disrupted the trial. In the middle of the trial, she got up and called them all liars. She said, "You're liars." And this is something that was added in the opera from when we first did the first workshop performance in 2016, and with the production 2019, because I was researching the project, and I realized this disruption happened in the court, and I said, "This is too operatic. You have to do that. You have to have that." And so she really lays into the district attorney. The central part of the abuse of the 5 was the fact that they were minors, and they were being interrogated over a long period of time, held without food or water, for 36 hours, and basically forced to confess to the crime, saying that they would, if they confessed to this, that they would, and first trying to get them to turn on each other, saying, "Well, did you see Yusef do this? We saw, someone said that Yusef threw the rock. Someone said that, that Raymond did that." And so it's a way that they try to coerce their confessions. And so the only evidence they really had in the case was their forced confessions, because they had no DNA evidence. There never was any DNA evidence tying them to the crime. Of course, a lot of the DNA stuff wasn't as developed in 1989 as was subsequently. When they found Matias Reyes, and they went back, and then they did find strong DNA evidence that Matias Reyes was involved in crime.
Did you consider actually staging and writing music for the interrogation? Because that sounds like a musical device of back and forth.
Oh,
and
it's fantastic.
accusation.
I mean, that was one of the challenges. And one of the things I was most excited about, how do I do the interrogation? And that worked fabulously well. I mean, I thought of the music, the kind of juxtaposing, going from cell to cell very quickly. So we had these doors that opened up, and they actually moved the doors. So they're like Cecil. So the mask and the district attorney move in through the doors and try to interrogate.
And it's disorienting.
It's very disorienting, and this idea and they're always shifting position. A clock is moving you see a clock above the stage moving. So this idea of how time is, what's happening in on 10 minutes in stage is hours. And so and then the rhythmic quality of the music too was something that was really interesting to me, because I wanted to make it so that it's propulsive and it's moving the action. Because a lot of what, in my approach to opera, I'm very interested in the music carrying the action. I mean, in a way that I think is different from other composers. Because I think of, and for me, that's about the rhythmic interplay and I think a lot of that approach comes because before I wrote music for opera, I did a lot of music for dance. And so when I think about people on stage, I think about them as moving bodies. So that it's not unlike, writing music working with a choreographer. So a lot of when I envision an opera, I try to see it on stage and to try to see what's happening physically with the people on stage.
This must drive you crazy, writing a piece like this. It's in your heart, it's in your soul, and it's in your thing.
Yeah, and also trying to build up how they're trying to break these boys down, through the interrogation.
You ever been stopped by a cop?
Yeah, good cop, bad cop stuff is.
No, have you ever been stopped by a cop?
Yes.
So you internalize that into that scene?
Yeah, so some of that. I mean, I remember when my first time coming to California.
What happened?
Okay, I was.
Oh, no, keep it short. Keep it short and keep it clean.
I'll keep it short, clean. Okay, I was driving from San Francisco to LA. Must have been in this early 80s or 70s. And my father was in residence at Stanford. So I was going, my friend Wes Brown and my ex-wife, Deborah Atherton, drove down to LA. So we're stopped at a stoplight in Los Angeles. And a cop comes up, puts his thing on, comes up to us and makes me stop at the stoplight. So I said, "Oh, officer, what, is there anything wrong? What's happening?" See? So he goes to my wife, who is white, and said, "Are you okay?" With these two African American men. I said, "Are you okay?" Thank God she didn't hate me then. because he said, "No, I'm telling you." No, she said she was okay. But I'm just saying, well, why would this white cop stop us, just ask if she's okay? It's like, okay. So, and I was stopped another time. I was driving from New York to Boston to play a gig with Anthony Braxton, and I was stopped on I-91 by a cop, and he pulled the gun out, and I had to wait on the side of the road for an hour until he had backup, because they said someone meeting my description had robbed a bank in Hartford. So
this is all in your head while you're thinking about this.
Of course, yeah.
Dad, had you it seems like this is the perfect setup to your next opera to be Scottsboro Voice.
Well, they already did Scott, the musical of that.
I know, but you need to do it.
I'm going to do the Tulsa Race Massacre. That's what I want to do.
1921.
I was going to do that, and I love doing operas that have political import. I think a lot of people don't know about the Watchmen series. I guess they showed a little bit of it, But they don't really know that this. It didn't just happen in Tulsa. It happened in Wilmington, North Carolina. And a lot of black communities that were thriving were destroyed because of the jealousy. And so, Tulsa, that was the Black Wall Street, was in Greenwood. And so we have a plan to do the opera called Greenwood 1921, which is it's actually the 100th anniversary of the massacre. It's coming up in a couple years.
So we have another scene here, clip here. Maybe you can set it up for us. It's the quintet, This World Is Ours. What's behind that? Where is that in the opera?
Well, this is when they were, the kind of their feeling of, before they're going into Central Park, this world is ours, hold your head high, this kind of feeling of the exhilaration of youth. This is, in a way, setting up their loss of innocence, because here is the expression of innocence,
They're looking forward.
Stand up, set up. The world is ours. It's open to them, and this theme comes back in different guises all the way through the opera. At the end of the opera, comes back again, and then it has this thing about Harlem is my home, Harlem when you're never alone. So I wrote this kind of thing. So, but it's the closest thing I can get to kind of an anthem. So every once in a while you have to write an anthem. So
Absolutely.
I wrote an anthem.
Maybe we can see that scene, This World Is Ours.
The world is ours, hold your head high. This world is ours, stand up, step up, this world is ours. When you pretend not to see, not to hear, stop acting like you have something to fear. Harlem is my home. Harlem, where you're never alone. Okay, that's it, huh? Yeah. This ain't no life. This ain't no life. This ain't living. This ain't no life. Time to fall. This ain't no life. This ain't no life. This ain't no life to act out. This ain't no life. This ain't no life. Break out. This is break out. This ain't no life. This ain't no life to fall. This ain't no life. Break out. This is break out. We are about to wild out. We are the freaks. We are the freaks who run the night. We are the freaks. We are the freaks who run the night. We are the freaks. We are the blade runners who can't be killed. The freaks who run the night. We are the swords who can't be whipped. We're stressed out, bust out freaks, down for anything and everything. We're out here, but we don't care. We are the young ones who'll keep coming. We are the freaks. We are the freaks who are the night. We are the freaks. We are the freaks who are the night.
Where's Central Park 5 going now? What's next?
I'm not sure. Hopefully we'll get a production in New York. We've had some interest from Atlanta and some other companies.
It's got to be in New York.
Yeah, New York is the place, has to be there. And I'm going to talk to ENO about it, the English National Opera, because I have, the director there is interested in my music, so I hope maybe we can do it in England.
Terrific. Join me in thanking Anthony for this wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
The world is ours, hold your head high. This world is ours, stand up, step up, this world is ours. When you pretend not to see, not to hear, stop acting like you have something to fear.